Andrea, munching on dried fish, asked Roland why he had summoned them. Roland playfully suggested they guess, promising an extra serving of ice cream sandwich for dinner if they got it right. Andrea's interest was immediately piqued. Ashes hypothesized that it might be to install plumbing in the room. Nightingale scoffed, pointing out that for simple plumbing, such large pipes wouldn't be necessary. Andrea felt a rush of camaraderie. Nightingale had thought just like herself, only Nightingale from the Witches' Union had the audacity to address the extraordinary witch in that tone. Since arriving at the border town, the only witch she felt closest to was Nightingale. They shared noble backgrounds and identical hair colors, recognized each other's combat abilities, and Nightingale was even willing to share her dried fish. Most importantly, she also had some beef with Ashes. Ashes huffed in response. Nightingale, smirking, mentioned that she was by Roland's side when he was drafting the designs, so she knew what they were for. Rem protested that it was unfair. Roland chuckled and declared that Nightingale was disqualified from this guessing game. As a hint to the witches, Roland mentioned the pipes were just a part of a system and suggested they might get their answer by exploring other places. Maisie and Lightning immediately zoomed out of the room. Andrea whispered to Nightingale, asking what it was all about. Nightingale confessed that even though she had seen the designs, she didn't understand them. She mused that if anyone in the Witches' Union could comprehend Roland's intentions just from the blueprints, it would probably only be Anna. After much hesitation, Andrea ultimately decided against asking Anna. Following the prince's hint, Andrea went from room to room, inspecting everything she could find. In the rooms that were completed, she noticed that the copper pipes were shielded with right-angled iron grates as if to prevent anyone from touching them. Outside, one of the pipes connected directly to the well in the courtyard. She speculated that it might be used to heat water, but that seemed too cumbersome. Prince Roland gathered all the witches in the Grand Hall and announced the official launch of the castle's heating system. Roland explained that firepan were inconvenient to move and required windows to be open for ventilation, otherwise, there was a risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. The new heating system had no such concerns. Apart from Anna, Soraya, and Hummingbird who were involved in the installation, the only one who guessed correctly was Tilly. All of them would receive the promised ice cream sandwich. Today, Roland was set to give a public lecture on the preparation of nitrogen, with Kyle assisting in the explanation. Roland initially believed Agatha and Kyle might dislike each other. Since on one hand, there was the chief alchemist of Border Town, passionate about alchemy to a fault and seemingly indifferent to others' feelings and perspectives. On the other hand, was a witch from a kingdom that existed for centuries ago, wearing the pride of being a member of the top research institution, the Exploration Society. Both were incredibly straightforward, and pairing them up seemed like putting two volatile components together, an explosion waiting to happen. Surprisingly, they got along exceptionally well. Kyle felt Agatha had done him a significant favor, while Agatha thought highly of Kyle's vast knowledge. After extracting the nitrogen, the majority exclaimed that they couldn't see it. Roland then posed a question: how could one prove that nitrogen was different from air? Tilly, Agatha, and Anna all provided the correct answers. Roland was thrilled with the deep academic atmosphere. However, the rest of the witches were utterly lost. Barav and Axe, who were also present, were just as perplexed. Nevertheless, Axe firmly believed that if it came from His Highness, then it must be correct. Atop the city walls, the riflemen were poised and ready. Facing the looming tide of darkness on the horizon, they calmly conducted their final weapon checks before resting their rifle barrels on the crenels. One soldier caught sight of the witches. Another remarked on how beautiful they all looked, recalling how the church had painted them as ugly and terrifying before he came to the border town. Yet another said, not only were they beautiful, but they were also incredibly powerful. He spoke of Ashes wielding the massive sword, able to bring down a mixed-breed demonic beast with a single strike. How he wished he had such strength. Suddenly, a third soldier shushed him, whispering fears about it being the power of demons. The pony-tailed soldier gave him a good smack on the head, scolding him for such nonsense. He reminded him that Lady Manhwa was also a witch, asking if he considered her a demon as well. Lowering his voice, he warned that uttering such things in front of the veterans of the First Army would lead to a beating. With that chit-chat settled, their gaze shifted back to the oncoming horde. This wave of demonic beasts wasn't much different from previous encounters, but then they spotted something massive within, an enormous demonic beast, unlike any they'd seen before. It was much taller than the city wall itself. Its massive horns and teeth were size of a full-grown man. They knew rifles would be useless against such a creature. They'd need the artillery crew. Glancing towards the position of the new cannon, its silvery barrel was already in motion. The gun slowly pivoted, aiming directly at the charging behemoth. A brilliant flash lit the scene, followed by a deafening roar. Unfortunately, it was missed. Andrea and Ashes hurried over upon hearing the commotion. As they arrived, a second earth-shaking roar resonated, this time, striking the colossal demonic beast squarely in the chest. The monster stiffly fell sideways with a heavy thud, its immense weight echoing across the battlefield, squishing many demonic beasts along the way. Unable to contain their exhilaration, the soldiers let out a triumphant cheer. Even such a fearsome and ferocious enemy couldn't stand against the mighty weapon invented by His Highness. And everyone on the city walls began to chant Roland's name. Roland only received the news after the battle had concluded. Upon rushing to the city wall, the massive body of the demonic beast still lay silently in the snow. Agatha, who had followed him, widened her eyes in recognition. She identified the creature as a hell dread beast. Agatha explained that several towns had been flattened by the hell dread beast's rampages. However, they were only ever seen as the ominous blood moon drew near. Roland, then recalling the diary entries mentioning that when the sky displayed a blood-red moon, the gates of hell would open again, he asked for an explanation. Agatha replied, implying that their time was running short, with at most 5 years remaining. At first, Roland was shocked but felt a bit relieved after fully understanding her words. Agatha looked at Roland, noticing his lack of urgency. Roland commented that 5 years are plenty. Based on their current pace of development, he'd be able to equip the entire army with new firearms in just 1 more year. 5 years would grant him ample time to ensure that the land, population, and resources reached a higher standard. He hoped to establish 3 more industrial cities that would provide a constant supply of food and ammunition, along with providing basic education for the people. By the end of 5 years, he could line the entire city walls with these cannons. It seemed as though Agatha had made up her mind. She took a deep breath and promised Roland that she would do her utmost to produce liquid nitrogen and liquid oxygen for him. Looking at Roland straight in the eyes, before she could finish her sentence, Roland reassured her that they would definitely defeat the demons. By evening, Evelyn returned to her apartment. The warmth of the hallway enveloped her immediately. The difference between the inside and the outside of the apartment felt like 2 different worlds. Walking through the living room, she noticed Andrea, Ashes, and Savvy engaged in a game of poker. Each of them had several pieces of paper stuck on their face. Andrea explained that the one with the most paper would owe the winner an ice cream sandwich the next time. Andrea invited Evelyn to join in. Evelyn pointed out that final exams were approaching, suggesting that everyone should be studying. Andrea responded by saying that the material was easy for her, and both Ashes and Savvy nodded in agreement. It was then that Evelyn remembered Andrea came from nobility, and both Ashes and Savvy can read and write. Politely declining the invitation, Evelyn chose to head back to her room and study. The next day, the witches sat together in the classroom, awaiting scroll to distribute the exam papers. Andrea was mentally counting, besides the ice cream sandwich everyone would receive after the exam, she'd have the additional one she won from Ashes and Savvy yesterday. That meant she could indulge in 3 portions alone. As for the exam, Andrea was fairly confident. The test papers were quickly handed out. She raced through the questions on the first page, but as she flipped the page, she realized she couldn't understand the math problems that followed. Taking a deep breath, she suddenly turned her head to sneak a peek at Nightingale in the row behind her, but Nightingale's expression showcased that she had no idea what was going on. Nightingale was staring blankly at the paper, a quill held to her mouth, her gaze unchanging for a long while. Looking over to Evelyn, she and Maisie were slowly working out the problems with their fingers. And when she glanced at Ashes, she had the same stunned look as Nightingale. During detention, Scroll announced the end of the exam. Andrea leaned back in her chair, watching as her paper was collected, suddenly feeling that the 3 portions of ice cream sandwich that evening might not be as sweet as she'd imagined. Scroll brought all the papers back to Roland's office. Roland saw a myriad of bizarre answers, or in some cases, he could sense the test-taker's agony and anguish between the lines. Nightingale asked why Anna didn't have to participate. Roland smiled while saying that Anna and Scroll were the ones who had prepared the exam. She then inquired about Tilly, to which Roland explained that Tilly had played the role of the examiner, having done the test in advance to check for any oversights, and had scored full marks. Once all the scores were tallied, he found that the first group of witches from Slumbering Isle had all shown noticeable improvement. Everyone had passed this time. Evelyn's improvement was the most significant. The scores of the 3 newly arrived combat witches were somewhat low. Nightingale's performance was rather disappointing. Her scores in 3 subjects were even lower than her previous test, making Roland somewhat bemused. It seemed that learning truly was a natural talent, sometimes it just couldn't be forced. The only one that puzzled him was Maisie. She hardly got any computational questions right in mathematics and sciences, and the formulas she used were utterly gibberish. However, she scored 90% on the multiple choice and true or false questions, resulting in an overall score of 63, which was somewhat unexpected. Roland really couldn't fathom how Maisie managed to do it. In the kitchen, Maisie and Lightning were preparing food. Maisie joyfully remarked how lucky she was to have gotten a double-yolked egg again. Lightning commented how Maisie always have such good luck. Maine had become the new pope. He once again descended into the dungeon. The last time he came here, it was to secretly execute the King of Grey Castle, Wimbledon III. He ignored the lamentations and cries of the others, heading straight to a specific cell door. The guard opened it for him, and he stepped inside. He saw Zero. The Pure Witch stood with her back towards the entrance, hands shackled to an iron bar above her head. Dozens of fresh whip marks marred her back. Maine asked Zero if she realized her mistake. Zero groaned softly as if roused from sleep. Seeing that it was Maine who had come, she laughed and asked, "When Maine seek obedience, does he mean obedience to Maine specifically, or a respectful attitude towards all the other bishops as well?" Although displeased by Zero's tone, Maine answered straightforwardly, "Obviously it's obedience to his commands." Zero responded that if Maine demanded as such, she would obey. Maine then ordered the guards to unshackle her. With his staff, he picked up her clothes, tossed them to her, and instructed her to get dressed and follow him. He had a mission for her. Zero casually draped the clothes over herself and followed him out of the long prison corridor. Maine began explaining that this year's month of the demons might last up to 5 months. He commanded Zero and the other pure witches to head to the Grey Castle. They were to exploit the chaos brought by the heavy snowfall to exterminate the rebels. On their list was Timothy Wimbledon and Roland Wimbledon. After waiting a long while without getting a response from Zero, he was about to punish her once again. Maine, with a stern face, turned only to find Zero's lips curled in a smirk, her eyes radiating a dangerous glint. A shimmering light appeared. When Maine opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in a vast plaza. He suddenly realized that this was the old holy city from when he had just become a believer. Zero suddenly materialized, mentioning that this was the place that left the deepest impression on Maine and that she admired it. Memories that momentarily faded reconnected in an instant. He felt a surge of anger and whipped around, his eyes locked intensely on Zero. He couldn't believe Zero dared use her powers on him. Zero spoke nonchalantly, "She is well aware of what she is doing. But for Maine, perhaps he don't fully understand." Maine was familiar with this power, knowing well that this was a spiritual battlefield, where one battles solely with consciousness within the world constructed by the intruder. Here, the victor gains all, and the loser is stripped of everything. He reached for the god's punishment stone necklace hidden under his clothing, wondering why it was ineffective. Seeing through Main's thoughts, Zero chuckled, its domain has been nullified. A realization hit Main. Only one person possessed such an ability, Isabella. He felt the sting of betrayal. If he had known earlier, he would have converted them all into God's punishment army. But regrets were futile now. All he could do was take a deep breath and probe for answers. Main quickly regained his composure. He threatened Zero, if Zero kill him, the judgment army outside will notice and apprehend her. And what awaits her won't just be flogging. Zero shook her head, she have no plans to flee. Instead, she aimed to replace Main and ascend to the position of the Pope. Main was taken aback by Zero's declaration, exclaiming, a pure one could never become the Pope. And the one to be crowned in front of the multitude of believers in the Grand Cathedral is Main. No one would recognize Zero as the Pope. Yet, Zero responded, she don't need to show her face. Acting as the Pope's messenger will suffice. After all, Oberlin remained secluded in the holy secret temple for years, and on the rare occasions he ventured out, he would wear a mask. No one will notice a change in the Pope. As Main continued with threats, Zero coolly interjected, once the spiritual battle begins, it cannot be interrupted. Furthermore, no one will apprehend her. Main were mistaken from the very start. Main gazed into Zero's eyes, finding no trace of emotion, only a serene, unwavering gaze staring back at him. Main's mind suddenly raced back to Oberlin's last words, let go of the Pope position could also be a good choice. My child, I'm sorry. He felt as if he had plunged into a chasm of ice. With chilling clarity, Main finally understood everything. Zero then elaborated, this battlefield was orchestrated by Pope Oberlin for them. Once the spiritual battle concludes, the survivor will become the true ruler of the church. Main couldn't fathom why Zero had turned out this way. Perhaps it was the memory she acquired from the king of Wolfheart and Garcia. Slowly approaching Main, Zero explained that the church was originally founded by the Federation. What the old pope did was merely to provide the witches an opportunity to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. She told Main that if he were to win, he could gain the memories Zero had accumulated over 200 years. Main thought to himself, the decision to let Zero activate the secret room was strange from the beginning. Despite being favored by Oberlin, she was just a witch, and shouldn't have access to the church's deepest secrets. Remembering when Zero had unlocked the room, and she said this was also her first time here. Pieces was coming together. Unfortunately, Main had overlooked this. Main asked Zero where she would lead the church if she won. She tilted her head upwards and responded, towards victory, or perhaps defeat, but certainly not flee to the fjord. Zero was already privy to the secret orders Main had issued. As the Third Divine War approaches, Main diverted some resources to secure an escape route for himself. A hint of sarcasm laced Zero's tone, the Divine War hasn't even started, and Main have already lost faith in victory. How can someone like Main be the spokesperson for the gods? Main couldn't hold back his fury, and started screaming if the gods truly favored them, why have they allowed humanity to suffer defeat time and time again? Main then laughed, to fight against the demons, they can only rely on God's punishment army. But with their current numbers, they can't change the outcome. Should he rely on the witches? Zero drew her long sword, pointing it at Main. She shook her head, the glint in her eyes sending a chill down Main's spine. Zero knew that this battle would determine the fate of humanity. Regardless of gender or age, everyone would become valiant warriors, rushing to the battlefield in waves, until they either defeated the demons or met their collective end. Main found this plan utterly ridiculous. Ordinary people would be paralyzed with fear at the mere sight of a demonic beast. How could they possibly combat the demon? Zero didn't respond, prompting a sudden realization in Main. The only way to grant ordinary people the ability to fight was... He can't believe it. Zero intend for everyone to consume the church's pill. Zero replied, they can rely on sheer numbers. In 5 years, they will have stockpiled 4 million pills. Apart from the God's punishment army, the pure ones, knights, and judgment army, they will have millions of additional forces. Maine was convinced Zero had lost her mind. How could an impure one nurtured by the church ever suggest such a thing? He believed that the memories inside Zero's head must have backfired. Zero took deliberate steps toward Maine, believing that acquiring knowledge was inherently a process of self-transformation. She had no intention of continuing their conversation. It was time to decide who would rule over the church. Maine fired the crossbow he held in his hand. Zero effortlessly dodged, following it up with a swift sword strike. Gritting his teeth, Maine watched Zero intently. Suddenly, a billowing red mist began to emerge from beneath him, spreading in all directions. Zero paused, her eyes widening slightly. Then, clutching her throat, she let out a harrowing scream. Standing within the red mist, Maine introduced this was the demon mist. Lethal only to witches. If he were to fill the entire square with it, Zero would die again and again. Zero laughed. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind surged, whisking away the red mist surrounding Maine. He recognized the wind magic stone set into Zero's ring. Without hesitation, Maine produced and swallowed a batch of pills. Zero nodded approvingly, deeming it a wise choice. Maine felt a rapid surge of power coursing through him. Meanwhile, Zero began forging her weapon. The blade was as broad as her own body, embedded with numerous magic stones. It felt eerily familiar. Indeed, it was the weapon of Icarus. The magic stones on the blade lit up one by one, followed by a blinding golden light emanating from its edge. The light dispersed the surrounding red mist. Maine saw nothing but consuming golden light. In an instant, the entire world seemed to crumble and dissolve within this golden glow. Back in the dungeon, Zero casually threw her draped cloak onto the ground. The Judgment Knight standing by respectfully bowed his head, presenting Maine's golden robe to her, a garment symbolizing the pinnacle of church power. He then knelt, proclaiming welcoming their new pope. Ferlin and his father arrived to the border town to meet with Roland. They were invited in the dining hall. Due to the heavy snow outside, both Ferlin and his father were clad in thick coats. Upon entering, they immediately felt the warmth of the room. Roland suggested they remove their coats, explaining the indoor warmth was due to central heating, a concept foreign to the father and son. He briefly explained what central heating was. The primary reason for their visit was to meet Agatha. Roland advised Ferlin's father to remove the stone of God punishment as a basic courtesy towards Agatha. Shortly after, Agatha, draped in her snowy cloak, entered the dining hall. Pushing open the grand doors, she hesitated for a moment before speaking. The divine war is upon them. She needs to use every available moment to produce weapons. She brushed the snow off her cloak. Perhaps due to working closely with the chief alchemist, her tone carried a hint of Kyle's mannerisms. Roland inquired if Agatha remembered, some 400 years ago when Takara was on the brink of destruction, a group of her servants separated from her, following the others to the mountains. Agatha thought for a moment. The memory seemed vague, but she couldn't fathom why it was being brought up after so long. As she removed her snow-covered hood, revealing her blue hair and face, both Ferlin and his father gasped in unison. They immediately knelt on one knee before her. Ferlin's father proclaimed he was a descendant of Kaga, and asked if Agatha recalled the name. In her time, Agatha had two main attendants, Kaf, who served as her guard captain, and Kaga, her chief housekeeper. Her expression turned frosty as she mentioned Kaga, asking if they were descendants of the very housekeeper who sneaked away with the magic stone and experimental records. Ferlin's father's eyes widened, and just as he was about to explain, Agatha's expression darkened, urging them to leave immediately. She claimed she no longer wished to see them. Without waiting for a response, the witch swiftly left the hall, not even allowing the pair an opportunity to explain themselves. Roland, puzzled, turned to Nightingale, seeking her insight. Whispering into his ear, Nightingale mentioned that both parties were indeed telling the truth. Roland contemplated this for a moment, and he quickly summarized the situation. Perhaps there is a misunderstanding. He suggested to Furlan's father to reside in Furlan's house for the time being and take the opportunity to explore the town. He promised to discuss the matter further with Agatha. Trembling from head to toe, Furlan's father gratefully thanked Roland. It was evident to Roland that Agatha's reaction had deeply shaken the noble. Roland then advised them to bring in the magical stones and the records they had in their possession. Seeing the remnants from over 4 centuries ago might alleviate Agatha's feelings, he mused, hopeful that their material proof could bridge the chasm of misunderstanding that had formed. In the evening, the prince summoned Agatha to his office. Roland recounted the story he'd been told to Agatha, informing her that regardless of how her housekeeper had acted, Furlan and his father's intention had at least been to return things to their rightful owner. Perhaps he had even hoped to atone for the responsibilities their ancestors had shirked. Agatha remarked that Kaga had merely deceived his descendants, and they owed her nothing. Besides, weren't they among the nobility of the Western Territory? If Agatha were to accept them, it would only hinder Roland in his future plans and expansions. Agatha understood Roland's ambition to bring the entire Western Territory under his control. Roland hadn't expected her to think this, yet from her tone, it didn't seem like she held it against Furlan and his father. Gently touching her hair, Agatha decided not to carry the anger from 4 centuries ago toward the present descendants. Roland was even more moved by the enlightened witch before him. He then jokingly inquired if Agatha would be interested in check her inheritance. Shooting Roland a sharp glance, Agatha replied that it wasn't her inheritance but that of the Exploration Society. Tilly opened the first box. Out of 10 boxes, each was filled with magical stones. Agatha referred to them as glow stones. Infusing them with magical power, a pale yellow light immediately emanated, rapidly surpassing the brightness of a torch. Only when the light became somewhat blinding did she release her grip. Roland's eyes gleamed as he observed these magical stones. When Anna brought up the topic of the ore veins and the treasure map, it was only then that Agatha remarked, "These are ore veins marked by the Exploration Society, intended for the location of the upcoming Holy City." When Roland asked why the stone in the mine was so tough, Agatha explained. When the God Stone is divided, its hardness diminishes dramatically with the reduction in volume, and its area of influence also drastically shrinks. For instance, the easily portable God's Punishment stone people often carry can be effortlessly shattered with an iron hammer. Roland then inquired if there were any methods to transform the magical stones. Agatha replied that there weren't. At this point, Tilly recalled seeing a perpetually shining lightstone at the ruins, which had been shining slightly dimmer for 400 years. Agatha mentioned that this would require the collaboration of a dozen or so witches. Some witches can replenish the magical power of others. By infusing it with a substantial amount of magic, it can shine for an extended period. However, these magical stones don't offer much assistance in battle situations. Pointing to the black leather books in some other boxes, Agatha's cheeks turned a rare shade of red. Some of them are copies of the Compendium of All Magic, intended as a guide for the witches who will settle the new lands and teach them how to evolve their abilities. Why would Agatha be embarrassed about that? Roland gave her a puzzled look, continuing his search through the remaining boxes. Sylvie found a secret compartment in one of the boxes. Upon opening it, Anna took out a cast-iron square box. Agatha stared at the box in shock, her hand trembling as she looked at the divine seal imprint, unable to believe that Kaga would possess something of this nature. She suspected he might have stolen it from other witches of the Exploration Society. Roland speculated that someone might have been attacked and entrusted it to Kaga. He then inquired about the nature of this divine seal imprint. Agatha responded, certain magical stones, when connected, can produce additional effects, either altering the nature of the magical power or amplifying its outcome. This has been one of the primary research focuses of the Exploration Society. These interconnected magical stones are referred to as seals, and the divine seals are the most powerful among them. Their magical stones are all sourced from high-tier demons. Throughout the entire Takira, there are only 3 or 4 of them. When Roland asked how powerful it was, Agatha calmly responded that it could level Roland's castle to the ground. Agatha commented, "The amount of magic needed to utilize this is staggering." Back then, only the top 2 seats of the Federation could employ the Divine Seal. Roland pondered for a moment and considered letting Anna give it a try. Agatha shook her head and began explaining why only Transcendence could use it. Almost in the blink of an eye, as Anna took the seal, the 4 magical stones on it lit up one by one. Their golden light grew increasingly bright, making the entire seal resemble a nascent sun. Agatha shouted for Anna to let go. The brilliance vanished in an instant as if it had never appeared. Exhaling deeply, Anna gently placed the seal back into its iron box. A hushed silence enveloped the office. Sylvie covered her eyes trying to recover from the sudden light. Everyone took a moment to catch their breath. Anna commented that using it consumed a great deal of magic. She could at most use it twice. Her statement felt same as saying, "The exam was a bit challenging, I guess I could only score 99% twice." Paper had gradually become familiar with this place. She is surrounded by people who always cherished and cared for her. Without the need to search for food or worry about the firewood she gathered being stolen, she hoped to stay in this warm place forever. As she entered the main hall, Paper noticed the witches were not sitting at the long table for meals as usual. Instead, they were crowding around a wall, chattering incessantly. She blinked in curiosity but felt too shy to ask Wendy what they were up to. Wendy smiled, telling her that everyone is testing their combat strength. Paper was puzzled. Wendy added, "It's a quirky term that His Highness came up with, don't mind it." Lightning infused her magic and lit up 2 stones. Meanwhile, Maisie boasted that she lit up 2.5 stones, which Lightning found hard to believe. Wendy asked Paper if she wanted to give it a try. However, Wendy reminded her that Paper hadn't learned how to properly use her magic yet. Suddenly, Paper felt unwell and collapsed to the ground. A sharp pain racked her abdomen, and she felt as if magic quivered within her body. Wendy recognized these as signs of a magical backlash. She held Paper closely, trying to comfort her. The other witches stood up and circled her, offering comforting words and urging her not to be afraid. Wendy's suspicions were confirmed. The next day, she took Paper to meet Roland. Despite enduring pain the previous night, Paper remained conscious. Lying in the large bed and surrounded by the witches who came to visit, she listened to their comforting words and felt an overwhelming urge to cry. Roland looked at the young girl with joy, welcoming her as a member of the Witches' Union. Roland examined the experimental notes left by the Exploration Society. To him, this was an entirely new world. Roland was planning to build a mage tower for Agatha, allowing her to continue doing her research. This time, he waited until Agatha had finished her day of acid-making work before calling her to his office. Agatha declined the offer, feeling that a chemistry laboratory like Kyle's was sufficient. That would be so out of style. Roland exclaimed internally. He set aside the draft sketch, then recounted his ideas from the morning, asking Agatha if she could complete the rune crafting on her own. Agatha shook her head in response. Suddenly, Roland turned to Nightingale, inquiring about her combat strength test. Nightingale turned away, stating it was a secret. Roland surmised that she was probably disheartened by Anna. Agatha was somewhat displeased that Roland placed something as valuable as the Divine Seal in the hall. Nightingale remarked, if the witches from the Federation saw this, they'd be so outraged by Roland that they'd come back to life. Yet, Roland thought to himself that those items weren't that precious at all. They were equivalent to just over 10 kilograms of TNT. Agatha commented that although the rune was a product linked to the magic stone, the materials guiding the magic power were extremely intricate. The most crucial ingredient was the demon's blood. After countless experiments, they discovered that the blood of witches, demons, and demonic beasts differed vastly. Fresh witch bloods can be used to create god punishment soldier. Agatha looked disheartened. This was the Exploration Society's top secret. After the experiments began, she left the society. Initially, the Exploration Society combined the blood of elderly witches with the stone of God's punishment, then infused it into ordinary people. This required more than half of the witch's blood, and it had to come from the same individual. This meant that each transformation resulted in the death of a witch. Many ordinary people also couldn't withstand the procedure and eventually died. The success chance were also very low. According to Tilly's intelligence, the church now had a large number of God's punishment soldiers. Roland was livid. He knew that the church couldn't possibly have found that many elderly witches. They captured witches, raised them, and in the end, drained them of their blood to create God's punishment army. Thousands of witches, each possessing unique powers, were mercilessly killed by the church. They were branded as fallen, despised, and shunned by the world. Nightingale might have sensed Roland's rage. Roland took a deep breath and pronounced, word by word, he will stop them. After Wendy took her bath, she was taken aback when she opened her bedroom door. To her astonishment, Nightingale was sitting at the desk, flipping through the book given out by His Highness to teach the witches in witch union. Wendy's towel almost slipped off in surprise. She thought Nightingale had an argument or a fight with the prince. Nightingale clarified that she hadn't. After listening to Agatha's words in the office, Roland feared that Nightingale intended to take on the church alone. Roland knew that within the church there must be many witches loyal to them, some of whom were exceptionally powerful. Nightingale told him to relax. She knew that going to war with the church, they need to rely on the firepower of their powerful army, was the most prudent approach. Roland reassured her that he would defeat the church, and Nightingale had every confidence in him. Nightingale exhaled deeply, recounting the experiments on God's punishment army as Agatha had described. She felt the need to become even stronger, to contribute more to the impending battle against the church. Wendy agreed with Nightingale's sentiment, thinking that perhaps the comfort of the castle had made her complacent. She suddenly realized that enemies were still near, whether it be the church or the demons. And the threat wasn't entirely gone. Yet she hadn't made much progress in a long time. Compared to those sisters who studied hard, like Rem, Hummingbird, and Echo, she seemed to have been too relaxed. Despite being the older witch, she couldn't even light up 2 magic stones. At this rate, she felt she wouldn't be deserving of standing before them as an elderly sister. Wendy took a deep breath, deciding that starting from today, like the other witches, she would spend an hour every night studying the prince's knowledge before going to sleep. After changing into her pajamas, she noticed Nightingale had already dozed off over the desk, lost in dreams. Beside the Crimson Water River, the makeshift shipyard was bustling with people. Today, Roland led everyone to witness the launch of the new ship. The workers tore down the wooden shed facing the river, revealing a gray hull. It slid down the riverbank and plunged into the waters. Everyone had expected such a massive object to sink instantly, but instead, the ship floated gracefully. Some of the townsfolk knew that this new ship had been constructed in just a couple weeks. Furthermore, His Highness was currently recruiting a captain and crew members. Nightingale didn't understand why Roland would reveal his newest ship. Roland explained that it was a display of military strength. Nightingale was still puzzled. Roland continued, saying it was to let everyone witness the monumental transformation of their town. Many probably had never seen a stone ship that could float. He hoped it would instill a deeper sense of belonging among the townspeople. Kakuzum was completely fixated on the new ship. Even for a basic sailing vessel, the crafting of the ribs alone would take over a month, not to mention waiting for the timber to dry completely. It seemed impossible to make a ship in just a couple of weeks. Wade glanced at Kakuzum, asking why he was so familiar with ships. Turned out, many years ago Kakuzum had been a captain, navigating between various kingdoms. It was only due to some unexpected misfortunes that he had ended up like this. As Kakuzum watched this miraculous ship, he pondered, within 2 years, His Highness would likely fill every river within Grey Castle with ships like this. After some thought, he decided he might as well apply for the position of captain. Out in the hidden forest, Leaf gracefully navigated between the forest searching for Lightning and Maisie. Ever since her abilities evolved, she had turned her attention to the hidden forest on the town's west side. To avoid losing her senses, she cautiously expanded her ability, starting from the western city wall. Each day, she merged a little more. One day she will be able to cover the entire hidden forest. Maisie and Lightning were on the trail of a wild boar. Leaf appeared from the tree trunk, startling the two girls. Almost as if they were speaking to a ghost. Maisie landed directly on Leaf's back, pacing a couple of steps, and even pecked where Leaf's body connected with the tree trunk. Leaf felt ticklish and couldn't help but burst into laughter. Perhaps sensing nearby presences, the wild boar took off in a run, and Leaf signaled the two girls to follow her. Unable to maintain a human form while moving, Leaf let vines sprout from the ground to guide the girl and the bird forward. Before them, a massive boar crouched by the stream, drinking the icy water. Its tusks were thick and sharp. Lightning drew her dagger, and in the blink of an eye, she shimmered like a golden flash, swooping down onto the boar from behind. Against Lightning's aerial advantage, the wild boar was too clumsy. It wasn't long before it lost its ability to resist, collapsing onto the snow. Leaf manipulated the vines to wrap around the boar's hind legs, hoisting it up and started draining its blood. She remembers that His Highness mentioned that meat without bloodstains tastes better. Leaf suddenly sensed more creatures intruding into the forest. Directing her gaze to the edge of her control zone, she saw two gray wolves approaching. Something felt off. She knew that such beasts usually roamed deep within the forest. Even in winter, they rarely ventured so close to the town's outskirts. Suddenly, a familiar silhouette appeared before her, making the hairs on her skin stand on end. The brutal battle she had experienced in the wastelands flashed through her mind. She saw two hulking demons slowly advancing towards the city walls. Their arms bore no magic stones, and they carried no spears on their backs, seemingly unarmed. However, Leaf noticed black iron gauntlets on their hands, the very weapons that had killed her comrades. With a deep sense of dread and unease, she urged the two girls to flee immediately. Briefly describing what she had seen, she cried out loud, "Go now!" Leaf told the two girls that the demons had no mounts, and won't catch up to them. Unexpectedly, Lightning hesitated for a moment and then shook her head. She wants to stay and fight them. Leaf asked her why. Lightning took a deep breath and then replied, "If they flee upon meeting the enemy now, how will they ever defeat them in the future?" The young girl drew a handgun from her waist. She remembered what her father once said, "Where you fall is where you rise." And she will not run away again. Lightning inspected the chambers of her pistol, ensuring every slot was loaded with bullets. She knew demons could be killed, their greatest weakness was their reliance on the red mist to survive. If they let such a dangerous enemy wander the town's outskirts, the risks would only grow. Leaf seemed momentarily persuaded by her words, falling silent. Maisie chirped softly by Lightning's side, and Lightning chuckled, "I got that." "What did Maisie say?" Leaf asked. Lightning translated with a smirk. Saying Maisie said she wants to shred their heads with her claws, flatten them with her wings, then roast them over a fire to see if they're edible. But Maisie only chirped twice, Leaf pointed out. Sensing the demons were about 300 meters away. Leaf hesitated, likely because the past encounters with the demons had left deep scars in her memory. But now wasn't the time to dwell. They planned for Leaf to first entangle the demons with vines, after which Lightning and Maisie would launch an aerial assault. After a brief search, Maisie transformed into a hawk, spotting the prey. Under her hawk-eyed gaze, even a rabbit dashing through the snow couldn't elude her pursuit. One target each, Lightning proposed. When they are halfway in their dive, Maisie will then transform into the giant winged beast. Lightning exhaled a frosty breath, gripping her pistol tightly as she began her descent. The biting wind whipped past her face, making her ears sting. She recalled the shooting techniques Nightingale taught her. The iron gauntlet worn by the enemy was likely embedded with electric magic stones. Their effective range was about 5 meters, similar to witches. Thus, shooting from 7 to 8 meters was optimal. The enemy's figures became clearer. Suddenly, one demon halted, lifting its head to roar at them. Simultaneously, countless vines sprouted, coiling around the demon's legs and climbing upwards, ensnaring the demons tightly. A flash of white light enveloped Maisie, and in an instant, she transformed into a massive beast, letting out a resonant cry as she dove. Gritting her teeth, lightning sped up. She took a sharp turn and pointed her gun at one of the demon. As one demon broke free, lightning shot struck its chest. The demon charged at her. She fired 3 more shots, but she missed. Calming her breath, she took another shot. A red mist exploded behind the demon. The bullet had not only pierced its body but also shattered the gas tank on its back. With a painful wail, the demon quickly fell to the ground. Maisie's situation, however, was far worse. A bolt of lightning from another demon struck Maisie directly, sending sparks flying. Her screeching turned into a scream of agony. Her wings curled up, and she crashed heavily onto the demon below, sending up a wave of snow. The impact was so fierce that lightning felt the ground tremble beneath her. Perhaps the collision had shattered the gas tank on the demon's body because a red mist began to spill from beneath the giant bird, making the young girl's heart skip a beat. Leaf reacted immediately. Dozens of vines combined into one and lifted Maisie off the demon. The giant bird rolled a couple of times in the snow before lying still. Lightning felt anxious and dashed towards Maisie, cradling her massive head and shaking it gently. Maisie opened her eyes, seemingly unable to maintain her magical form any longer, reverting to her original form. Lightning checked her over, and after ensuring she was unharmed, let out a sigh of relief. She was glad that Maisie was okay. It seemed that while in her flying beast form, Maisie couldn't be harmed by the red mist. Moreover, her resilience increased when she grew larger. The electric shock had merely knocked her out temporarily, and the demon had cushioned her fall. It looked terrifying at first, but she hadn't sustained much damage. Leaf appeared from a nearby tree trunk and inspected the lifeless bodies of the 2 demons. They decided to bring back the corpses for the Highness to handle. Roland was taken aback when he heard the news. Without taking the time to ask for details, he rushed with Leaf to the castle's back garden. There, he saw lightning unloading the bodies of 2 demons from Maisie's back. Just as Roland was about to ask if anyone was injured, the young girl jumped down, darting straight into his arms, proudly announcing they had defeated the demons. She tilted her head upwards, her eyes gleaming with a "praise me" look. If she had a tail, it would undoubtedly be wagging. Roland exhaled deeply. Thank goodness that none of them were injured. Seeing lightning like this, he couldn't very well yell at her for not reporting back after encountering the demons. He decided to set that issue aside for now and began asking about the details of the event. Listening to their back-and-forth recounting, he was finally able to grasp the gist of what had happened. The battle might have looked easy, but it carried significant risks. If Maisie hadn't miraculously withstood the bolt of lightning unscathed, or if the demon had managed to break free from Leaf's binding, the outcome could have been unimaginable. Nightingale couldn't help but appear and reprimand them for taking such risks. But we won, Lightning pouted in response. Nightingale retorted without hesitation, saying it was mere luck. Had Maisie been severely hurt by the electric strike, things would have gone very badly. She then turned to Maisie, saying that she should have reported back, instead of frolicking with Lightning. Make such a mistake again, and she can forget about getting any dried fish treats from Nightingale. With that, Maisie lowered her head in guilt. Truly deserving of her title as the strongest witch in the border town, Roland thought to himself with an approving glance at Nightingale. Looking at the 2 bodies in the back garden, Agatha wore a somber expression, warning everyone not to underestimate these demons. Roland closely inspected the 2 demon corpses. Their frames were massive, both standing over 2 meters tall. The variance in their blood color made sense. Human blood is red because it's rich in oxygen-transporting hemoglobin. These creatures might not even need to breathe oxygen, so any blood color wouldn't be surprising. What puzzled Roland, however, was the fact that even though the two demons resembled humans so closely, they seemed to lack certain parts. Roland wondered how the demons reproduce. Roland curiously asked Agatha if the demons had genders. Agatha replied, "There's no concept of gender among them, and how they reproduce remains an enigma." Over the hundreds of years of battling the demons, many had noticed an intriguing phenomenon: the evolution of these creatures. Some demons, previously gravely wounded by witches, would reappear on the battlefield in a different form. Yet from the remnants of their old wounds, it was evident they were the same demons. This suggested that the higher-ranked demons weren't born that way but evolved through countless battles. Once their evolution was complete, even their physical form would change. With the advancements in demonic stone technology already being a major concern, the enemy's ability to evolve made it no surprise they had dealt severe blows to humanity in the two divine wars. Crouching down, Roland examined their clothes and belongings. Thankfully, these items didn't seem technologically advanced, some even appeared rather outdated. Among the items, Roland came across a stone tablet. "It's their way of recording information," Agatha explained, "but they've never managed to understand the writing." The remaining magic stones were standard gear for scout demons. A dull ache began to throb at the base of Roland's skull. He thought the demons were aware of the existence of the town, and now sending scouts over. Agatha shook her head, saying if they were truly intent on scouting human settlements, their movements wouldn't be so careless. For effective reconnaissance, they would send 2 to 3 squads, usually accompanied by demonic beasts as mounts, and they wouldn't stray far from each other, at least within the support range of their spear-throwing fiends. Ashes chimed in. Could it be that the demons deemed border towns too insignificant, so they casually sent just 2 of their kind? Agatha pondered the suggestion and eventually rejected it. During the Federation era, even the smallest of border towns would have a witch stationed for protection. The demons can't possibly be aware of the human world's changes over these past 4 centuries. Hence, their scouting should still be based on the tactics from the Second Divine War. Roland felt a weight lift from his chest. Agatha believed the demons might not even be aware of a human settlement here. They might just be surveying the surroundings of their camp, expecting to encounter primarily demonic beasts. That's probably why they didn't bring the magic stones or spears and chose the more convenient lightning stones instead. However, when he learned of the nearby demonic camp, a fresh wave of headache washed over Roland. Having the enemy set up a base right at one's doorstep was vexing. How are they supposed to live their days peacefully now, he mused. Tilly cast a concerned glance at Roland. Roland knew he needed to locate the camp and eliminate the threat. The praise from Ashes says this is the decision a good lord would make. They will support Roland wholeheartedly. Entrusting the task of scouting to Lightning and Maisie, Roland instructed them with emphasis, under no circumstances should they engage the demons on their own. Their safety is the most important. After a pause, he added, if they successfully locate the camp, there will be an ice cream sandwich for dessert every day for the next week. Salivating at the thought, both promised to accomplish the mission. Days later, not far from Border Town, a site resembling a demonic camp was discovered. A deep cave mirrored the one previously found at Agatha's experimental tower site. To ascertain the situation, Roland consulted Sylvie and Soraya. Upon viewing the sketches, Roland was taken aback. Another cavern? Could there be another massive creature inside? If the previous one devoured the experimental tower, he wondered if this one swallowed the demon camp? He pondered if he had missed crucial information linking the 2 incidents. To Roland's unease, Sylvie pointed out that the underground tunnels were directed towards the snowy mountain, aligning perfectly with the direction of the cave found in the hidden forest. All signs led to one location, the Grey Castle, specifically beneath the palace. Inside the palace, Timothy sat languidly on the throne, his right hand propping up his face, displaying slight impatience as he observed an assassin demonstrating his skills. Perhaps Timothy's generosity has made these jesters overconfident. A man in a black hat proclaimed, should the traitor Roland ever cross his path, he will easily take Roland out. Casting a fleeting glance in front of the man, Timothy noticed 4 daggers impeccably lodged into a barrel not far from him. Timothy coldly watched the man in the black hat boasting about his skills. Without much of a word, he signaled to one of his knights. The man in the hat started to panic, inquiring about Timothy's intentions. "Defeat the knight, and his reward shall be granted," Timothy declared. A scream soon filled the hall, revealing the outcome. Timothy, without casting another glance at the fallen assassin, shifted his attention to the status of the new weapon made from the snow powder. An official reported the not-so-promising progress, revealing that the weapons made were nowhere near as powerful as rumored. Only a few could penetrate a knight's armor from within 10 steps, and hitting a target beyond 50 steps was almost impossible. Timothy clenched his fist in frustration. Their manufacturing rate was low and the quality was unreliable. Many of their metal tubes had exploded, causing the soldiers to distrust the new weapon. He couldn't fathom how Roland, in a town much poorer than the royal capital, managed to produce hundreds in just one winter. To Timothy, it could only be the aid of the demons. A minister interrupted his thoughts, announcing the arrival of envoys from the Kingdom of Dawn. Since the palace was bombed, Timothy had to receive guests in his study. To invite the foreign envoys into a basement would be a grave insult. As Timothy entered his study, 2 young envoys, one male and one female, with strikingly similar features, awaited him. After formal greetings, Timothy assumed they were there to beg for resources or food. But the male envoy corrected him, "They are not here to seek aid, but to address a greater threat." Taken aback, Timothy inquired, "What threat?" The young woman continued, "The church has occupied 2 kingdoms. Numerous refugees are flooding into their borders. Their king believes the church's ambition does not end there. Both Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn are in grave danger. Their king wishes to ally with Grey Castle to stand against the church." As she finished, they presented an agreement, a potential treaty for mutual defense. The gravity of the situation was undeniable. The world was changing, and alliances were becoming more vital than ever. Taking out a map, the young male envoy spread it out in front of Timothy. "If the church launches an attack from the Holy City against either the Kingdom of Dawn or Grey Castle, then the other kingdom will lead their forces northward to lay siege to the Hermes Holy City. This move will halt the church's advance, leaving them vulnerable at both ends. Timothy still relies on the church for supplies of the pills. With this agreement, the chances of obtaining pills from the church were dimming. Without the pills, how can they expel Roland from the western regions? However, the church was an entity they had to be wary of. It would be ideal to purchase enough pills and unify the entirety of Grey Castle before forming an alliance with the Kingdom of Dawn." Timothy mentioned that he needed to consult with his ministers. He then asked, "How much do they know about the situation in Everwinter and the Wolfheart Kingdom?" He wondered if all the information came from the mouths of refugees. The envoy's knowledge was limited, especially when asked about Garcia and her Black Sail fleet. The female envoy reported that Garcia and the King of Wolfheart had fled the capital and met their end during a chaotic battle, yet no bodies were found. Timothy exhaled, feeling a slight regret, but this was one of the few pieces of good news they'd received since winter began. He hoped the intel was accurate. Watching the envoy depart, a smirk crossed Timothy's lips. He thought to himself, "Saying this is the fate of traitors. And he claims that Roland will end up just like them." Meanwhile in the fjord. By the time the last house was built, the horizon was already turning a dusky hue. A man clapped his hands in delight, gazing at the newly built structures. Lien adjusted her scarf to cover her ears, enveloping them in the soft warmth of cotton wool. She had picked up this warming technique from the western regions and introduced it to Slumbering Isle to keep the residents warm. The man inquired about the cost if he were to hire her long-term, hoping to have Lien develop other areas of his territory. He was keen to find out how much it would take to persuade Tilly to let Lien go. Lien had no intentions of leaving, but the man interjected, painting a picture of a better life elsewhere, where she could stay with him, enjoying fine wine and delicacies from the 4 great kingdoms, and always having attendants by her side wherever she went. Lian frowned, recognizing this all-too-familiar attitude. They claimed it was employment, but in reality, it felt almost like she was being bought. Just as she was about to retort, Breeze pulled her hand. Standing between them, Breeze obstructed the man. The man's tone shifted irritably. He claimed that the sleeping curse promised to grant any request. Suddenly, a hand landed on his shoulder. The man turned to look and was taken aback. It was Thunder. Seeing Thunder, the man changed his demeanor, muttered a thanks, and hurriedly left. Lian sighed in relief and expressed her gratitude to Thunder. Thunder had just finished an adventure and happened to be passing by. Speaking of his adventure, his eyes lit up with enthusiasm. For the first time, he saw the sea with completely different heights. It was as if the ships were flying towards the towering walls of waves without falling into the deep sea. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he'd never believe such bizarre sights existed in this world. In the evening, the witches gathered. They snuggled together on the warm-heated bed, sharing tales of their experiences in the border town. The group would chat deep into the night, answering their curious and envious questions. When the conversation turned to the Western Territory and Prince Roland, the atmosphere was jubilant. Amid the overlapping chatter, a thought uncontrollably popped into Lian's mind. What if it was Prince Roland who wished to employ her long-term, instead of the fat merchant? Would she have accepted? Thinking about it, she realized that if it were Roland, she wouldn't be able to refuse. How embarrassing. Lian nestled deeper into her blanket, glancing around. Thankfully, the lamp was already extinguished, so nobody could see how red her face was. She wondered when would Lady Tilly finally accept Prince Roland. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could be together forever in the border town? Lian hugged her scarf tighter. That way, both she and the other witches could happily live in the border town. Back in border town. Manhwa stretched and yawned as she rose from her bed. Reluctantly leaving the warmth of her blankets, she slipped into her thick winter coat and made her way out of the bedroom. There, she found Aunt Ada tidying up the living room. Munching on a piece of bread, she greeted her, to which Aunt Ada responded with a warm smile. Soon after, Manhwa stepped outside, greeted by a gentle snowfall. Every morning, she followed the same routine, leaving her house to go to the medical center. If there were injured people, she would help them. Otherwise, she would practice her skills on injured animals. Waiting at the medical center could sometimes be dull, but she persisted for the sake of treating the wounded as quickly as possible. Another thing that kept her going was the smiles and warmth of the townsfolk. Everyone would greet Manhwa, often inviting her for meals. As she walked, she was continuously showered with greetings. This contrasted sharply with a year ago, making it seem like two different worlds. Her sisters often said that she had become the most popular witch in the border town, even surpassing Anna. But Manhwa didn't care about popularity. She simply cherished her life in the border town. Every townsfolk she had treated would greet her warmly, filling her heart with a sense of accomplishment. Upon reaching the medical center, the soldiers by the door saluted her with respect. Manhwa, in her typical energetic manner, ran up to the second floor. But as she opened the door, she found Rem, Hummingbird, and Lily lying listlessly by the table. Seeing her, they immediately stood up to greet her. Manhwa was overjoyed to have her friends around. Rem brought a deck of playing cards, mentioning she learned a new game from Andrea. Lily chided her, suggesting if Rem put the same effort into learning the prince's new knowledge, she wouldn't be lagging behind. Manhwa chuckled at the scene, feeling like she was back in Professor Carl's academy, living those carefree days. By evening, everyone had returned home. Rem, drying her hair, leaned close to Lily, who was seated by a desk. Rem admitted her envy of Manhwa. Without even turning her head, Lily just nodded. Rem had mentioned how both the soldiers and townsfolk deeply respected Manhwa. Rem too yearned for such regard. Lily explained that it was because over half of the people living in the town had received Manhwa's help. Rem wanted the same. Then learn from Manhwa, Lily advised. Proactively help the townsfolk or evolve her own abilities. By bedtime, Rem still had these thoughts weighing heavily on her mind. Although she knew that what Lily said was true, she couldn't shake the feeling of being useless within the witches' union. She didn't want to continue feeling this way and certainly didn't want to take this opportunity for granted. After all, it had taken her so long to find a place where she truly felt at ease. Spending her days aimlessly made her feel restless. During the night, she hardly slept. The next day, with dark circles under her eyes, Rem knocked on Roland's office door. Roland, seeing her, assumed Rem had recently been bullied. She shook her head, leaning over his desk. She reminded him that Roland once said she had great potential, yet her abilities hadn't evolved. Roland couldn't help but chuckle. He had been pondering the same issue. Agatha mentioned that aside from constant practice, another way to evolve one's skills was through sudden insight. Wanting to assist Rem, he posed a question about her understanding of magnetism. After hearing her textbook response, Roland realized that while she could recite the concept, she didn't genuinely understand it. He drew a diagram and started explaining. Rem's eyes widened as she tried to follow, but she was lost. Seeing her confusion, Roland reassured her. He told her it was all right if she didn't understand right away. He asked her to follow a specific method of practice, if possible, try to change the direction of magnetic field lines, like switching from the left hand to the right. If she can get a hang of this method, Roland said, he will then prepare a small toy for Rem as a gift. Once Rem masters this technique, Rem will naturally evolve her ability.